Tucked along the seemingly straight line that is the Colorado-New Mexico border is the time capsule of the Cumbres and Toltec, a vestige of the once far-flung Denver and Rio Grande Western Empire that tamed these wild lands at the end of the 19th century. Left for dead just before the culmination of the space race, the 3-foot rails were reduced to 2 sections, the famed Silverton branch with its raging river and skyscraping views that is a bucket list ride for anyone. Meanwhile, the other remaining portion stretches from the sleepy mountain town of Chama, New Mexico, over the lofty Cumbres Pass, an elevation higher than the Silverton branch ever did, but with views spanning miles further before ending at the town of Antonito, Colorado, at the southern end of the San Luis Valley. This 64-mile stretch has been caught in a time warp of sorts, where one can find views of the line that reach from its last days in the late 1960s, further back unto the days of the first spikes in the early 1880s. In the fall of 2024, we catch a hodgepodge of trains, including the daily trains pulled by its 1925 Baldwins in various states' dress, from their style as delivered, the early days of the 1970s as a tourist hauler, and finally to the modern dress introduced in the 1990s, paying homage to the Flying Rio Grande. Join us as we venture from both ends of this famed railroad between these two towns that are a mere 33 miles apart, but almost double by rail. We'll venture from Antonito to Chama westward in this video, following the various trains as they make their way along the serpentine set of rails. We begin this video with the westward journey early in the morning, well before the dawn. We find the 1903 built K-27 class number 463 accelerating out of Antonito with a train of freight cars in tow. Dawn is just breaking over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, the eastern wall of the San Luis Valley, the range creating the southern spine of the Rocky Mountains, reaching past Taos to the rails of the Santa Fe Railway at Glorieta Pass, marking the furthest southern reach of the Rockies. Below the 14,350-foot tall promontory of Mount Blanca, we catch a double-headed freight train. The road engine, the venerable K-27 number 463, backdated to its 1920s dress, while on its front drawbar, we find a diminutive 10-wheeler T12 class locomotive. Instead of seeing the 168 today, we catch the long-lost T12 number 167, waving the white classification flags on both sides of the now installed Pyle National headlamp. Of course, the 167 was lost to the pages of time decades ago, and this is just 168 in a modern paint scheme, pounding up the grade towards Hangman's Trestle. 167 and 463 back away from us to load up and head west. And earlier in the year, well after the sunrise, we catch K-36 number 484 pulling a special geology train into the Conejos Range on this same stretch of rails. This excursion has trained geologists on board to help explain the unique terrain that the line travels through to rockhounds of all types. Leaving Hangman's Trestle, supposedly named for the victim of vigilantes who used it as a makeshift gallows, we witness both the 484 with the geology train and the T-12 and K-27 combo make their way up gravity, aka State Line Hill, before finally disappearing over the horizon of escarpment of lava. Speaking of lava, our next location to grab westbound trains is the first name locale in the timetable, Lava. This sweeping curve is laid out in such a fashion that a short connecting track makes it possible to turn whole trains around, just out of sight to the west. We're spotted next to the long out-of-service water tank here. This tank caught fire in the early days of the Cumbres and Toltec and would eventually be replaced by the Antietam tank that once was located north of the depot. While today is still out of service, the tank has been undergoing repairs that will soon have it once again filling the cisterns of thirsty locomotives. We leave lava on the edge of the Rio de los Pinos Valley and leap past the Whiplash Curve. West of Bighorn Peak, in the station of the same name, we witness multiple trains, including the geology train led by 484 and the photo special with the 168 and 463 navigating the many finger-like canyons that radiate off the canyon of the Rio de los Pinos, like fractals cutting through the slope of the Conejos Range as it winds towards Sublet. On the eastern extremity of the old railroad town of Sublet, we catch the 463 with 11 cars on the drawbar, looping around to maintain the steady climb towards Cumbres. Not far behind the markers of the 463 came a mighty strange contraption, the Galloping Goose. Now owned by the Galloping Goose Historical Society of Dolores, Colorado, motor number 5 was built for the Rio Grande Southern, a railroad stretching from Durango to Ridgway, Colorado, and always in a near constant throe of death. The RGS built 7 motors of a home-built concoction to stave off the final curtain. Of course, that curtain was lowered in 1952, but 6 of the original geese remain, including a reproduction of the missing original. At Sublet, the Mud Hen, the nickname of the K-27 class, takes on water from the standpipe placed here nearly a century ago to replace the above-ground, classic DNR-GW style water tank in the underground system. After the departure of the 463 to points west, we once again catch Goose number 5, basking in the brisk fall air. Holding back behind the photographer's special, the motor is deadheading, a trip without paying passengers, to move back to Chama for its return to Dolores. With the rails of the Denver and Rio Grande Western and the Rio Grande Southern long ago torn up between the two villages, and the loading ramp being at the western termini of the Cumbres and Toltec, it heads for that ramp after a fall in the brilliant aspens. High above Toltec Canyon, the drainage of the creek of the same name, we catch the 463 winding its way through the pines and mostly denuded aspens as it departs the hoodoos of the Phantom Curve region between the bores of mud and rock tunnels. Clinging to the side of the sheer bleeding edge that defiled of the Toltec Gorge, the railroad punches through a pinhole carved through the granite walls. This is Rock Tunnel, and it's 600 feet down to the Rio de los Pinos below. Just east of Osier, we're witness to the Mud Hen and Goose combination as they prepare to enter the yard limits there. Only the Goose will continue its westward sojourn, and the 463 will turn on the balloon loop installed to allow trains to return to their point of origin without having to run around the train and pull it backwards. With our journey taking us around the northern horn of Pinarellosa Mountain, the railroad opts for the straighter route, following the River of the Pines, more commonly known as the Rio de los Pinos. From Osier, over the lofty Cascade Trestle, before turning north at the confluence of the river and Cumbres Creek, towards the station and water stop of Los Pinos. After following the Rio de los Pinos for nearly 25 river miles, the rails of the Rio Grande crossed the Rio de los Pinos for the first and only time on this pile trestle. Today we catch the 489 with a mixed consist of narrow gauge cars, including a freshly restored Gramps branded tank car and refrigerated boxcar. Crossing the river here provides one of the few level places since leaving Antonito, but one that's short-lived as the railroad soon swings 180 degrees to use the western wall of the glacial valley to continue its climb towards the summit. Of course, after crossing the river, we come to the aforementioned curve at the northern end of the valley. As the train swoops to the south, the rails fall under the shadow of the water tank here, and the last chance to top off the tender for Cumbres. Finally leaving the valley of the Los Pinos and coming back alongside Cumbres Creek, we arrive at Apache Crossing. Leaving Apache Crossing, the railroad continues the westward march as it heads for Tanglefoot Curve, the final approach to Cumbres.
Weird looks familiar now. We were down there, not too far out of town.
Tanglefoot Curve, also called the Cumbres Loop, is laid along the headwaters of Cumbres Creek. And, like the track at Gravity Hill, Lava Loop, Whiplash Curve, the curves that permeate the canyons between Bighorn and Sublet, and the Los Pinos Valley, this showcases the engineering skill of the 19th century surveyors who laid down this trackage to keep the grades to a minimum. This route allowed for supplies to flow in as cheaply as possible to serve the burgeoning mining regions of the San Juans. Let's watch as the 488 pulls its train around Tanglefoot on the final attack of Cumbres. hop aboard the cab of the 488 as it leaves Tanglefoot and pulls into the station at Cumbres.
And the thing is, if you don't want the water in it, you know, because that means I would have to leave here at 3:45 in the morning.
We finally surmount Cumbres Pass, 10,015 feet above sea level. 488 stops to top off its cistern and perform the mandatory brake check before descending the 4% grade from Windy Point and along with the Wolf Creek drainage to the Rio Chama. Above Windy Point, we watch the train from the Continental Divide Trail as it wraps its way around the ancient volcanic pinnacles, through Coxo and trundles across Highway 17 before it passes Perry's Pond. Lobato, just southwest of the trestle of the same name, spanning Wolf Creek, is set in an idyllic meadow with stock pens and the remains of many a movie set, including the iconic, but fake, water tank from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Today we see 489 drifting through the fading color of asphalts with the daily train. Leaving Lobato, the railroad squeezes through the Narrows, where it and Highway 17 squeeze along the canyon walls of Wolf Creek. The grade slackens off as it approaches the Rio Chamo and the yard limits. As the 489 clears Highway 17, we leave the railroad here and end our westward journey over the Cumbres and Toltec at Chama, where the locomotives and rolling stock will be serviced for their next journey east, up the 4%, where they'll drift once again back towards the Rio Grande and the San Luis Valley.
Hey guys, you've reached the end of the video, but that doesn't mean you can't stop watching for more content. Make sure you click like and subscribe, and check out for more of this extra content in some of these other boxes. I'm Big Deal. Thanks for watching.